So the man of the hour here. We're going to have some fun. Tonight we are here to honor Dewey Pierotti for serving as the president of the DuPage County Forest Preserve District for the past 2 decades. Dewey's the longest serving president in the history of the DuPage County Forest Preserve District. Now, if you know Dewey, you know he's a family guy. He's got his kids here, he's got his grandkids here. This is pretty cool. I'm glad that they were all able to come. But Dewey's passion for conservation really came later in life. As a kid, growing up in the city, he really didn't have a whole lot of opportunities to engage in nature or really to play outside. And when he and his wife Leslie had kids, that's when he really started spending time outdoors, taking the kids fishing, visiting parks and forest preserves, and was very active in his son's scouting activities. Now, I met Dewey in 1992 when I worked for the Forest Preserve District. He was first elected back in 1992 to the DuPage County Board, and back then, as many of you remember, you get elected to the county board, you also wore the hat of being a DuPage County Forest Preserve Commissioner. 2 years later, he was elected by the commission to be the president of the Forest Preserve District. And in my position as public affairs manager, I had to work a lot with Dewey. And I know that Dewey always enjoyed reading my scripts when we did the videos. I'd give you the script and he'd get in front of the video, he'd get about halfway through it and he'd put it down because I'm not reading this. But my favorite personal story with Dewey has actually been a lot more recent, when he went on a canoe trip. And if you know Linda Painter, she's also a Forest Preserve Commissioner. She's a very tiny lady. And I made the mistake of putting her in the front of the canoe and putting Dewey in the back of the canoe. And this was about a 7.5-mile trip down the Fox River. And it was a windy day. So you can imagine this canoe going down the river like this with the front end up. And every time they turned the wrong way, the canoe became a sail and it turned sideways. And it took them quite a long time to finish. I think we ended up having to tow you in. We had a rope and a couple canoes to tow you in, but I'm glad you had your life preserver on that day. But you know, Dewey accomplished a lot over the past 2 decades at the Forest Preserve District. And for us as an open space agency, one of the most impressive is that under his tenure, the Forest Preserve District was able to preserve more than 3,000 acres of land and get them over the 25,000 acre goal that the Forest Preserve District had for quite some time. Some of the more notable acquisitions, and these aren't all of them, these are just a few that I noted. Night Heron Marsh in Aurora, St. James Farm near Warrenville, over 600 acres. That was a heck of an acquisition. Wayne Grove Forest Preserve up near Hanover Park. The Dunham Forest Preserve in Wayne, about 400 acres on Army Trail Road in Wayne. That was another huge acquisition, probably the last large acquisition the Forest Preserve may ever make. And also adding 100 acres to the West Branch Forest Preserve up near West Chicago, protecting a very rare fin. And these are just a few of those acquisitions. When Dewey first came on, one of the first things he had to do was to stop a 4-lane highway going through Pratt's Wayne Woods Forest Preserve. And we're all very grateful for you doing that, Dewey. He also added 8 of the Forest Preserve sites added to the Illinois Nature Preserve System, which means that not only are they protected locally, but they're protected through the state Nature Preserve System. Dewey also provided leadership for the Forest Preserve District's agreement to clean up the thorium and restore Crest Creek and the West Branch of the DuPage River, and a restoration project that I think is the most impressive urban restoration project ever taken in the Midwest. If you haven't seen the West Branch of the DuPage River lately, it looks absolutely fabulous. Dewey also worked and supported splitting the DuPage County Board and the Forest Preserve District. That occurred in 2002. And I think we would all agree that that's a really good idea. And during his 2 decades at the helm, the Forest Preserve District passed 2 open space referenda, one in 1997 and one in 2006, totaling more than $143 million. And that was primarily to acquire open space, but also to do some capital improvements, and also to do some restoration work. And when you pass a referendum like that, or two referenda like that in 9 years, the public is saying, we want more open space. But the public is also saying when they vote, because they're saying no to a lot of good things, but they said yes to the Forest Preserve District because that's how they feel about the Forest Preserve District. And they support the Forest Preserve, and they support their mission. But I think Dewey's biggest accomplishment, and I think all of you would agree, is that he kept the forest preserves by saying no to repeated attempts to use forest preserve land for non-forest preserve purposes. And for that alone, he deserves a round of applause right now. In 2006, Dewey and his wife Leslie created the Paul D. Pierotti Memorial Scholarship Fund when his son passed away. And this is a scholarship for students interested in working in the environmental field. And instead of taking political contributions, he channeled that money into this scholarship that he and his wife set up so students could have some money to further their college careers and their majors in the environmental fields. And unlike many politicians, Dewey is not self-serving. He has demonstrated that in how he has treated the Forest Preserve District employees and the district as a whole, working to make it the best place for future generations, for his grandchildren, and for our grandchildren. So ladies and gentlemen, please stand and join me in welcoming to the podium the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County's President, Dewey Pierotti.
Someone once said, I don't deserve that, but I have arthritis and a gout. I don't deserve that either. So, I always thought Brooks was my friend. I know I gave him a hard time the first time when I was at the Forest Preserve. He came in to do a video presentation, and it was supposed to be a 1-minute clip, and it took 2.5 days, and I still never finished it. I think the Conservation Foundation owes me a lot, because if it wasn't for me, he'd still be at the Forest Preserve. Now, Brooks alluded to that canoe ride. I don't want to tell the rest of the story. You're going to hear Paul Harvey here. He's been after me for so long, you got to come out and do that river thing. So he puts me in this boat with Linda Painter, and she might go 80 pounds, and I'm sitting here, and I'm in the back of the boat, and I'm from the city of Chicago. I was brought up that you didn't get anything that didn't have a steering wheel and a brake pedal. We just and the motor was nice too. So I get in this canoe, never been in a canoe before in my life, and we start rowing. Well, everyone's going, and they're going in straight lines. All I know is going from one side to the other side, and then I noticed something funny. I thought that all canoes had one level, but I looked up, and Linda Painter's up in the sky. We were out in that water for over 2.5 hours, and she came back with an oar and never touched the water. Now I'm telling you, I would get to the location, and Brooks is making a heck of a presentation saying this and that, and I just get there, and it's time to leave. I never heard 15 seconds of his presentation. Now they said we're in the home stretch. We make this turn, and Brooks said to me, you only have a couple of miles to go. It's a straight shot. Well, the hidden thing in that was we were going against the wind and against the current. And you couldn't believe this. We were going this way and that way. And Linda, who was a canoeist, I figured, well, as long as she's okay, I'm okay. I look over, and she's there on her knees saying the rosary. Well, she's not even Catholic, so imagine how I felt. I said, holy smokes, it's all over. But they sent 3 guys in kayaks to save us. That's a true story, and Brooks, I thank you very much. It's something I'll always remember.
Back for those videos.
Yeah, right. Well, when Brooke asked me to come up here, I said, what do you want me to do? He says, well, the odds are you'll never write a book, so why don't you tell the story behind some of those acquisitions and tell them some of the stories that the statute of limitations has gone by so no one could come after me for it. But, so I'm going to try to fill you in on some of these things. You know, as Brooke said, I got elected to the county board in 1992. And I was on the board for maybe 8 or 9 months when someone said, you have to run for Forest Preserve president. So I got my campaign gear going, and I started running. And we got to the election, and the vote was 12 to 12. The deciding vote had to be cast by the chairman, and at that time it was Gail Franson. So the real thing, and Kenny Lehner will know this, at that time Gail was going to wanted to run for Secretary of State, I think. So he needed the support of Pate Phillip and Lee Daniels. And guess who my sponsors were? Pate Phillip and Lee Daniels. So when it came time to cast his vote, he cast it for me. And that was probably the best thing that happened to me because I really found my calling. I went over to the Forest Preserve, and like any good person, I started, what do I have to know? Well, the first thing I did was I memorized our mission statement. And after that, I read the Downstate Forest Preserve Act. And I can tell you, the gentleman who wrote that act way back when did a heck of a job. Because in my mind, it's almost a perfect piece of legislation. And even in that time, they took into consideration all the possible troubles that could happen with people trying to get into the Forest Preserve and take it away from why it was created. And that act is simply great. And then I realized very shortly that the biggest asset, the largest asset the Forest Preserve had, was its employees. And that statement is as true today as it was then. The Forest Preserve District of DuPage County is really fortunate to have a group of dedicated professionals that not only know what they're doing, have the education to back it, and have a lot of personal pride in performing their duties. And once I recognized that, I had the easiest job in the world. I'm basically a lazy person. So the good manager, you're going to recognize talent, and you're going to delegate authority to them. You're going to let them go. And that's what we've done at the Forest Preserve. Over the years, we've done, well, I can tell you that we've acquired so many properties, and Brooks alluded to a lot of them. I can tell you, I'll start telling you the story on some of those acquisitions. But the big thing is that we took the position that the Forest Preserve was not a land bank for any organization. I don't know if there's anyone here from school boards, etc., but I remember school boards would come to me, you know, some very affluent areas, and say, we want Forest Preserve property because we don't have enough schools for this and schools for that. And I said, you know, I come from a little middle class or lower middle class operation, but we knew if someone was born and they went to kindergarten, the odds they were going to go to first and second grade and high school, so you have to adjust for that. And I look at my tax bill and I look at the salaries I'm paying, I think you guys should know better what you're doing. And believe it or not, I have the scars from those discussions. But we took the position. We used to, at the beginning when I first got on the Forest Preserve, we were contacted by at least 4 times a month, even more frequently than that, from school district, municipalities, fire protection districts, etc., all wanting Forest Preserve land for their purpose. And I took the position, like I stated, we're not a land bank. We bought this property with taxpayer dollars, and it's not fair to me to turn over property that was paid for by all the people of DuPage County and turn it over to, for example, if Addison wanted a piece of property, let the people of Addison pay for it. Why should the people that live in Naperville have to do that? And that was my position. And that was a hard thing, because politically, that was a hard thing to enforce. And that's the reason it was so important, and it was so significant that we separated the two, that we made the Forest Preserve Commissioners separate from the County Board Commissioners. Because in essence, the County Board Commissioners, when I was serving both, you can't serve two masters. And I could tell you that they did a terrific job. They tried to do that, but it was an impossible task. A perfect example is what Brooks alluded to, when they were going to try to put a 4-lane divided highway through the middle of Pratt Wayne Woods. They had the votes. It was going to be done, because if you were looking at it as a county board member, it made so much sense to do that, because it would have alleviated all the traffic problems in the western part of the county. But from a forest preserve issue, how could you possibly justify almost dividing in half the largest single forest preserve entity that we own in DuPage County? You couldn't do it. And it was passed. So you know how I beat it? I vetoed it. You know how I vetoed it? Because I had the support of the Conservation Foundation. And you're going to hear that remark over and over again as I go through some of these acquisitions. Without the support of the Conservation Foundation and its memberships, we could have never accomplished what we accomplished with respect to preserving and maintaining the integrity of the property that the Forest Preserve holds in trust for you, the people of DuPage County. The reason it's such a wonderful job being a Forest Preserve Commissioner is this. When you're at the county board or even the school board, etc., you build a building, and right away depreciation sets in. Right? Sooner or later, it's going to have to be replaced or something like that. At the Forest Preserve, when we buy a piece of property, and we hold that property, my grandchildren are going to have it, their grandchildren, it's in there for perpetuity. And that's the way it should be. And I think the reason because we took just a firm stand at the Forest Preserve is the reason that we have the quality of life that we have here in DuPage County. Where are you going to go in a centrally located urban community and find the open space? We own almost 12.5% of the total area in DuPage County. That's a heck of a percentage to own. Excuse me. Now, we're going to go through these acquisitions. I'm going to tell you some stories behind some of them, and some are kind of interesting. But you're going to find, like I said, the common theme: Conservation Foundation, Conservation Foundation. And there's a lot of little things that happen behind the scenes that you people aren't aware of, and probably never. I'll give you an example, and I take a lot of pride in this. Back in 2002, I believe, thank you. Back in 2002, if you remember, it was a Democratic landslide in Illinois. They elected Blagojevich. He had a Democratic Senate, a Democratic House of Representatives. What was the first thing they wanted to do? Expand O'Hare Field. Well, over the years, the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County had acquired little small pieces of land all over and surrounding O'Hare Field for the specific purpose, to be quite honest, to stop the expansion of O'Hare. Well, what happened was, under the law, which established Downstate Forest Preserve Act, no one could condemn Forest Preserve property. Well, if you control the governor's seat, you control the House, and you control the Senate, what do? You change the law. So we found out through our lobbyists that there was a bill in place that the governor was ready to sign that would have taken away the exemptions for the Forest Preserve and would enable anyone, any municipality, any taxing body to condemn Forest Preserve property, which would have been a tragedy, really. Well, in my previous life, I was a Democrat. I hate to say that, but I was. I was out of the city of Chicago, and You know, once a Democrat, now a Republican. But anyway, I got to know, you know, this is many years ago, so I got to know a lot of the Democratic leaders when they were just starting out, when they were precinct, they were committeemen, and et cetera, et cetera. So working with my lobbyists, I got to rekindle old friendships. And I worked for the first Mayor Daley. And so most of you weren't even born when he was around, but then I worked for him and with his family, and got to know his son. And so we met with, they put me in contact with Rosemarie Andolino. And I said, you know, you've got this bill in place that's really going to destroy the heart and soul of the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County. They said, well, that's the brakes. We're going to take away your exemption and we're going to condemn your property. I said, listen, you're a politician. I've been in politics too. Where are those cases going to be held? You're going to hold those cases in DuPage County. I don't give a damn what rules you pass or what laws you change. It's going to take 5 to 10 to 15 years before you get clear title and you get that line, you get that runway built. I said, I'll tell you what, let's do a Monty Hall and let's make a deal. I said, if you change the language of that legislation and make it that the only one person, the only entity that can condemn forest preserve property is a major international airport for the sole purpose of expanding their runways. I said, if you do that, we'll have quote-unquote friendly condemnations throughout DuPage County and you'll get your runways built. Well, lo and behold, I worked with Rosemarie Andolino, who's in charge of that at the airport, and we got that done. And I took a lot of heat because no one lives closer to the airport than me. So I'm still kicking myself in the pants. But anyway, we got that done, and we kept the integrity of the condemnation. No one could condemn forest preserve property. Now, how things come around, when the airport had to mitigate wetlands they had on their property. They could do it any place in the state of Illinois. You know where they did it? In DuPage County. I was able to get over $11 million in funds from the airport authority for that wetland mitigation. So it became a win-win situation. Now, you can't talk about stuff like that because those are the things that people don't even realize are going on. And I could go on and tell you one story after another about things that went on. The Tri-County Park, when that deal, our contract expired. They were supposed to be paying us $1 million a year for the maintenance, not a year, over a 3-year period to maintain Tri-County Park. All of a sudden the contract ended. I got called down to Springfield and they said, we're going to embarrass you. We're going to close the Tri-County Park. I said, you're not going to embarrass me. That property is owned by the state of Illinois. That's a Democratic holding. And they said, well, I said, you're going to be embarrassed because that's the only state park north of 80. I said, if you close that, that's going to cause it to be very embarrassing. Well, at the same time, what happened, Blagojevich in his wisdom, was eliminating the gas energy. Well, I don't know if you people know this, but from our landfills, we have providers that operate recovering the gas, the methane gas, and turn it into electricity and selling it on the open market. Well, there's a tax credit for that. So Blagojevich and the state of Illinois was going to eliminate that tax credit. Well, at that time, that was generating a couple $1 million a year, or close to that, to the forest preserve in revenues. So I said, I'll tell you what, you people don't have the funds to operate Tri-County Park, but we'll operate Tri-County Park if you give us an exemption from that law. Okay, so then I went to the village of Bartlett, and I asked the village of Bartlett, we're going to build a new facility for their park district. I said, you can operate, if you operate the facility at Bartlett, we'll give it to you rent-free as long as you take care of that. So that was a trade-off. So to make a long story short, how can I tell the taxpayers when I get criticized for operating a park and spending forest preserve money to patrol it for security, and it isn't even in DuPage County? I can't tell them I'm getting a couple $1 million a year for doing that. But I could go on and tell you, I can tell you those stories now because I'm out of office in 3 weeks. And by the time they file the paperwork, I'll be somewhere in Florida. But anyway, but I just want to let you know there's so much that goes on beneath the surface to operate a facility as large as the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County. And believe me, we could never do it without the employees and the expertise of those people. They make the job of the elected officials so easy if they just listen to their recommendations. You know, I want to go through some of these things, and I'll do that Paul Harvey story behind the story. I think this first one here is self-explanatory. This was a purchase that we made that Brooks alluded to. Which one you got? The night here in March? Okay.